Hey, Moses. I think you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there you go.
So, yeah, we can keep recording this so I can play it back to myself and see where I can cut times and stuff, and maybe where it needs to be honed down, etc.
Perfect. I was going to say, I have it set up to automatically record just in case I forget to turn it on. So I usually turn it off, but I'll leave it on if you want, and then I'll send it to you.
Yeah, that would be nice. I need to see what other time savings or how I can pare it down so we can have some time for discussion or questions.
Perfect.
The first hour was kind of jam-packed.
All right.
So let's see. There's some. Let me mute this thing, otherwise somebody might interrupt. Okay, so I was wondering if I should start with what are the first few minutes I was gonna talk about before we set up in the second hour. There's gonna be like a first few minutes. I'm gonna say some few things and then set it up. So we never talk about that, but maybe I should run through that a bit and then go back to the top of the first hour presentation.
Okay,
Maybe.
sounds good.
Okay, let's try that. You might have to enable me to screen share.
Very good point. I keep forgetting. This is the second run through I've done today, and I keep forgetting that. So there you go.
And you can all hear me. Okay, so sound share must be checked. That's a good thing. Okay, well, one second before that, I should go through and close off all these windows that are open so that we don't have too many other things in the background. Screen share. Still all this? Okay, what do you see?
See it looks like changes possible slide.
Oh, well, yeah, I should probably stop all this. Stop all the presentations, all the other websites should be closed off. Okay, so let's share the screen before. Pick the spot where I'm supposed to start. Okay, I think we are ready. Okay. Okay, so what do you see?
Part 2, to overcome racism, we must face it. And it's in presentation mode. There's nothing visible but the slide.
Okay, that is good. Okay. Oh, crapola. I should not do that. I should have my notes too. So let me go back and do it correctly. Okay, so right here. What do you see?
Some constructions of racism slide, and it looks like presentation mode. I can see the bar at the top, but no notes or anything.
Okay, so the bar at the top, I think we'll have to do it because in this presentation mode, it does that.
Yeah,
So
not a big deal.
something we'll just have to live with. Okay, so well, let's go with it. So, okay, so in the Montana Supreme Court, it seems like we don't want to talk about race, and the bar is not talking about it. The Supreme Court, if you argue about race, they pretty much kind of gloss over it and don't want to address it, and they act as if they're living in a post-racial society where the law is colorblind. So, like we talked about in the first hour, the Supreme Court of Washington readily acknowledges their past systemic racism that happened in that state. And but in Montana, the public defenders are not talking about it. The state bar isn't talking about it. It seems like we, as the public defenders, also are trained to accept injustice, systemic injustice, and avoid talking about racial oppression. So are we being gatekeepers? Are we providing justifications for the oppression? So we'll talk about some constructions of racism. So in 1785, the Land Ordinances Act gave 640 acres of land at $1 per acre to citizens. And some land went to veterans, and some of the proceeds of the sales were reserved for schools, which is why some schools started being tethered to property taxes. And then the Homestead Act of 1862 gave 160 acres to any citizen willing to build a dwelling and plant crops. And also in 1939, the Federal Housing Administration loaned $120 billion in home loans, mostly to citizens, 98% who are white. So as we will see, the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1790, to be eligible to be a citizen, to be naturalized, you had to be a free white person of good character. In practice, only white male property owners could naturalize to acquire status as citizens. Women, non-white persons, and indentured servants were not allowed. So the access to citizenship was restricted to only free white persons until, through immigration anyway, until the elimination of it in 1965, and which was a product of the civil rights movement. Case in point, Mr. Thind had a case where he fought for the United States in World War I, was granted citizenship, and then after he came back, his citizenship was revoked. And so this is an interesting clip.
The court case of a man named Bagassen Thin shows the extent that America would go to prove who should and shouldn't be considered an American. Bagassen Thin came to America from India in 1912 to further his education. Once settled in the United States, he supported himself by working in the lumber mills. When America entered World War I, he joined the United States Army and was granted American citizenship. However, his citizenship was quickly taken away by the Immigration and Naturalization Service. He applied for citizenship again in 1919 under the Naturalization Act of 1906, which allowed only free white people and people of African descent to become U.S. citizens by naturalization. The Immigration and Naturalization Service turned him down once more and later sent his case to the Supreme Court. Thinn's participation in World War I and his contribution to the American labor system truly made him believe that he was meant to be an American. Thinn risked his life fighting for a country that ultimately didn't want him as a citizen. Thinn strongly argued that because he is in the same category as a white man and holds the highest ranking within the Hindu hierarchy, he should be granted citizenship. He was able to do this because the Naturalization Act of 1906 allowed some interpretation to occur in regards to what it meant to be a free white person. However, by presenting the Caucasian race as equivalent to the free white man, Thinn complicated his own case. The Supreme Court, on the other hand, argued that the word Caucasian not only was not presented in the law, but was probably unfamiliar to the original founding fathers in the year 1790. By saying this, the court concluded that although Indians and white Americans were both Caucasians, the concept of whiteness made them different. The Supreme Court argued that the everyday white American would be very surprised to think that someone like Thinn would be white. The Supreme Court began to define whiteness by what the everyday white person thought whiteness was. The Supreme Court basically depended on the majority population to decide who to include in the white category. Thinn could not be a citizen because he didn't fit into the category. The Supreme Court was now viewing race as something less than biological and dealing more with character. So why does this matter to us, to nuestra comunidad? Well, the U.S. versus Thinn court case set the foundation for who could be considered an American. It exposed the ability of the government and the majority of the population to interpret U.S. principles to their own benefit, or in other words, cuando le conviene.
Okay, so growing up, all the institutions, I grew up in Kenya, all the institutions were founded on white supremacy and still had relics of white supremacy. In the boarding schools where I went, like, here's a link to my school, police, the government, the church, the corporations, the banks were all founded and still had relics of white supremacy. And so in the picture here, you'll see the director, the founder of my high school, George Griffin. And in the middle here is one of our teachers. He was an agricultural officer, later became a PE teacher and an assistant administrator. His name was Pat Shaw. He had a code name Romeo 9. And some people refer to him as the Kenyan James Bond. And here on the third picture, you see him having apprehended. He was a police reservist, and he was responsible for extrajudicial killing of low-level and high-level criminals in Nairobi. And here it's in our school lawn, in front of the students, is parading one of the suspects in chain. And so in Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta, the first president of Kenya, once said, when the missionaries arrived, the Africans had the land, the missionaries had the Bible. They taught us how to pray with our eyes closed. And when we opened our eyes, they had the land and we had the Bible. In school, I was taught Johann Ludwig Kraft discovered Mount Kenya. Johannes Rebmann, a German missionary and explorer, discovered Mount Kilimanjaro. So the point is there's some parallels between the Kenyan boarding system, the Kenyan church, the Kenyan government, all the institutions in the government with the treatment of Native Americans in the United States. So this afternoon, we want to explore some of the constructions of racism. I've touched upon the land allocation and the immigration. And so our next activity is to we don't have to order society where there's one dominant class of people while they in castes where there's an upper caste and some lower castes. We don't have to do that, but it's founded on capitalism and exploitation. So if you rank people in castes, it's easier to exploit them. And so this afternoon, our aim is to talk about some of these constructions of racism and unpack them. You will research online. Some of these, we'll just restrict it to 2 things because we don't have much time and we'll need to leave time for discussion in the end. So the first groups will talk about the 1785 Land Allotment Act and the Dawes Act, compare and contrast those 2. And then the second group will talk about State v. Peoples, the case, the Supreme Court decision. And the Supreme Court decision, I've prepared some questions you can use to talk about State v. Peoples. Of course, there's the Mausolean article, and then there's the opening brief, the reply brief, the summary. You can gloss through the summary, and then the Mausolean article, and then you can gloss through the opinion and the briefing, and then you can, well, why did the Supreme Court order oral argument in this case? What was different for the dissent? Why did they dissent? In our office, in the appellate office, the first question, a question came up, did the argument about race hurt the client? So you can discuss that in your meeting. Okay, then there's a Mausolean article. What viewpoint is it capturing? So those are some tantalizing questions. And the author of this opinion, their profile there's a link to their profile. Did their past experience in law enforcement influence the decision? Talk amongst yourselves about that. And then there's an interesting footnote 22. Maybe you might want to look at it and discuss it. So we'll break down into small groups and discuss. And then in the end, we'll report back. Okay, so that's how, and then when they come back after this, we'll have a little discussion, have people talk a bit, and then, okay, go back to the practical tips that we covered in the first hour. What do you think?
I think it looks good. I like how you decided to bring it down to 2 topics rather than 4. I think that'll be much easier to get through.
Yeah, and also then we can have some time to talk. And also I'm trying to limit what I say so that it's like, I'll hold it down to about 6-7 minutes, so then they have more time.
I think the only thing I would say is I like it a lot. Just keep in mind that they can't click on the links to get to the stuff that you're saying.
What I'll do is I'll send those to you, the links in a Word document.
Okay.
And then I don't know how we're gonna do that. Yeah, I'll just send you the links in the Word document, and then they'll have them. They can click on them.
Okay.
Or I can put all of them in the Google. I could put I have this. The summary is in Google Docs, so I can just provide the link to the Google Docs and add the other links on it there.
Or if you get me the links, we're talking, Emily has the training website up. So she said we could send course materials to her. So you could be able to say, go to the OPD website, click on the tab for training. The stuff will be in there. And we
Yeah,
can
do you
send that
think-
out in advance.
You think that's the best way, or is there an easier way? Because I think if they have to go to some other place, I'm just wondering the person who's going to have to do this, if you make it as easy as
How-
possible for them.
How about, so you could put them in the chat for the Zoom people.
Mhm. Yeah, so I'll put one in the chat. So I'll put everything, all the links to the documents on the Google spreadsheet. And
Okay.
then if you click on the spreadsheet, you can go to any of the links. So then I'll just provide one link and then it will have everything.
Okay, perfect. And my
So
only
you just-
concern with Google is sometimes I get blocked from it. The state won't let me access it.
Oh yeah, there's that.
That's my only concern with that. Because yes, obviously that would be the easiest solution, which is why we can't have nice things. But
Yeah, okay, so I see that. Well, let me see. Let me give you the link, see if you can click on it. You're in the state machine.
okay,
And then, okay, so if you can click on it, then, so the summary. Put it in the chat and see if you can just click on it. Just click on that link and see what happens.
oh, maybe. It lets me sign in with my Gmail account, maybe?
Oh, so yeah, that could be an issue. So yeah, so if some people could be an issue.
I think so.
Yep.
Yeah, because I can get into it, which is excellent to know because I've run into this issue with the APD stuff because they keep sending me things in Google and I'm like, because I can't even get to it. I can actually get to this, but only because I've got a Gmail.
Yeah, so we'll have to figure some different out. What I'll do, okay, so that's a problem to talk about, to think about. I'll either send you the links or I'll put them, send me how the other method of putting them up. I can do that as well. So the first one, at least they just go to the internet and then they look up what they find, and so that's easy. Second one, they can still do the same. They can go to the Supreme Court website,
Yeah.
put the name of the case, and find it that way. But I think I wanted to provide it for them so it's easier, so they don't have to waste time doing that.
Yeah.
And then there's also the link to the Missoulian article. So the good thing about this case is it's important enough, but then the Missoulian took the view of the Supreme Court, and they didn't really want to entertain what Peoples was arguing. So who creates the narrative? Who frames the narrative? So anyway, so that's what was interesting about this case. So I think let's get out of this, and then I can go to the top of this one and try to pare it down a bit. So let's run through that and see if it's actually pared down and if it's better. so I try to get some more time for comments and discussion. So let's just run through from the beginning and see, or should we do that?
Let's go for it.
I'll go for it. So so let me do a slideshow. Wow, get out of there. No, I don't want to do that. I want to first do the presenter view, and then what do you see?
See the to overcome racism, we must face it slide.
Okay, so my name is Moses Okeo. I'm a humble African, and I became an American when I was an adult. I see myself as a storyteller. think my calling is to tell stories with complexity and completeness and dimension. I think this last year, the best thing that happened to me was my daughter was born. And so for the sake of my daughter, I want to be optimistic and believe that better must come. I think COVID-19 is to me like a final wake-up call. The world needed to wake up to start taking care of each other and to find cross-racial human solidarity, which has been missing. So before we go any further, I'm required to give a disclaimer that I'm expressing my views and only my views, and I don't reflect the opinion of the OPD. So we'll start with the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with their creator certain unalienable rights, that among them, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So a young nation came up with these lofty ideals, and the day after the Declaration of Independence was penned, we continued to struggle with the definition of men. Does men include Native Americans? Does men include Blacks? Does men include women? Does men include Latinos? On my first day of law school, Professor Kevin Brown, a Black professor, posed the question, what is the law and who is it for? This is one of those questions I've been mulling over since law school. I find myself with the unenviable task of convincing fish that we are surrounded by water. So I guess we'll continue. Ralph Waldo Emerson called the law a memorandum. So at any point in history, the law captures the prevailing sentiments of the times. So you got to read the law to understand the times. So does the law protect only property? Was the law intended to protect the haves from the have-nots? Does it preserve the status quo? Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Black and brown people have been demanding to be treated as men, as reflected in the preamble to the Constitution. And the story of America seems to be the refusal by the dominant culture and the systematic devaluation and dehumanization of Black and brown people. So to capture the memorandum in Plessy v. Ferguson, 1896, Justice Brown used the law to reflect the memorandum of the times when it describes the dominant white culture's power as follows. It's the power to assign a particular coach, which obviously implies the power to determine which race the passenger belongs, as well as the power to determine who, under the law of the particular state, is to be deemed white and who a colored person. Justice Brown continues, it is claimed by the plaintiff in error that any mixed community, the reputation of belonging to the dominant race, in this instance, the white race, is property. In the same sense that a right of action or of inheritance is property. Conceding this to be so for the purposes of this case, we are unable to see how this statute deprives him of or in any way affects his right to such property. If he be a white man and assigned to a colored coach, he may have his action for damages against the company for being deprived his so-called property. Upon the other hand, if he be a colored man and he be assigned and he be deprived of he has been deprived of no property since he is not lawfully entitled to the reputation of being a white man. So is whiteness still property in this country? Is this still currency? Justice Harlan dissented and said, the white race deems itself to be dominant, the only justice who dissented, dominant race in this country. And so it is in prestige, in achievement, in education, in wealth, and in power. So I doubt not it will continue to be for all time if it remains true to its great heritage and holds fast to the principles of constitutional liberty. But in the view of the Constitution, in the eye of the law, there is in this country no superior, dominant, ruling class of citizen. There is no caste here. Our Constitution is colorblind. So, is there a white caste in America? Our Supreme Court does not want to talk about race. Anytime somebody talks about race, argues about race, the Supreme Court glosses over as if those arguments are not made. And as a result, we also are afraid, or we don't want to talk about race. So why is that? Let's start with the elephant in the room, I think.
The Blind Man and the Elephant by John G. Sachs. It was 6 men of Hindustan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, "God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall." The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, "Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp, to me 'tis very clear, this wonder of an elephant is very like a spear." The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up he spake, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a snake." The fourth reached out his eager hand, and felt about the knee. "What most this wondrous beast is like is very plain," quoth he, "'tis clear enough, the elephant is very like a tree." The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, "E'en the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can? This marvel of an elephant is very like a fan." The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a rope." And so these men of Hindustan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion, exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. Moral. So oft in theologic wars, the disputants, I ween, rail on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about an elephant not one of them has seen.
So when we talk about racism, we prate about an elephant none of us has seen. The bizarre thing is this tale has been attributed to John G. Sachs, a white man, and not to the Indians from Hindustan from whom he stole it. So imagine you're the blind man who stepped on the elephant, who had the misfortune of standing behind the elephant as she took a ritual dump. It will be of no comfort to you for somebody to insist the elephant is like a rope or like a fan. A lot of times the danger is we assume like if you are a white person, you assume that all your experience is the same experience that all people of color, brown, Native Americans, Latino, the way the system treats you is the same way it treats the other. The fact that you can be mouthy when you're interacting with a police officer doesn't mean I can do the same. So imagine if instead of discounting the experiences of the Native American, the experiences of the Black person, the experiences of the trans person, the experiences of the white person, imagine if we try to perceive the elephant together, imagine if through cross-racial human solidarity, white listening to Black, white people sharing how this racist system has affected them, because it definitely has a deleterious effect to poor white people as well. Imagine if the native is listening to the Latino, and the Latino is sharing power with the Asian, and the Asian is sharing power with the Black. Imagine if we as a society, as a community, can construct a shared reality, a shared identity. I think it's possible, cross-racial human solidarity, cross-racial sharing notes, so we can truly perceive the elephant in the room. In my view, racism is like a power struggle. There's the dominant race holding on to its internalized racial superiority and using the power it finds itself in to subjugate other races. And at every turn, the institutions, the press, the schools, the church, the police, the military, the theater, the law, are being used as tools of oppression. And that's one thing that a lot of people in the dominant culture don't want to admit, they don't want to see. So I think this is what we are talking about. So instead of providing equal treatment, the institutions always change to defeat the claims of the subjugated. So Desmond Tutu, who passed away last year, said, if an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. A lot of white people don't want to see how the system, they don't want to know, they might be aware that that happens, but they don't want to know. They all want to see how the system interacts with the Native American, how the system interacts with the Latino. And the evidence is there, the anecdotal evidence is there, but you don't want to see it. So if you decided to be neutral, you have chosen the side of the oppressor or the side of the status quo. Is that where we are? So anyway, I'll talk about the elephant as I see it. Anyway, I'll start with me. I think Montana's legal system rejects the anecdotal evidence of systemic oppression. And anytime we make arguments in the Supreme Court, it gets glossed over and the opinions come up as if it never was made. So, so that's what we want to talk about. And maybe we want to influence the court. I'll give you a contrast with what is happening in Washington so that you can make up your mind. Is racism something that's happening only in Washington, only in other states? It's not happening in Montana. So the whole system now wants to, waiting to come up with that. They have this buzzword now, the whole Montana legal system has this buzzword about data-driven decision-making, and they are waiting to invest lots of money into data, and so that their decision-making can be data-driven. in essence, the people at the pinnacle of the system don't really believe there's unequal outcomes or unequal disparate treatment of the other. If you're waiting to get data, it means you don't really believe there is any systemic oppression. You're waiting to see through data. So what is the theory of injustice in your system? What are you trying to address? How are you framing the question? What is wrong with your system? Well, you need more data, you need better policing. What is the theory of injustice in your system? So Black and brown bodies know it firsthand that they're receiving disparate treatment. There's unequal treatment in Montana. So I love anecdotes. I like stories. I like human stories. So I'll tell you my story. The baby on the left is me. The one in the middle is my daughter, who was born last year. And the one on the right is my wife. My wife is half Chinese, Cantonese, and half white. So then comes the Asian Exclusion Act. So the Asian Exclusion Act banned Chinese from the United States. The Chinese laborers, it was a protectionist measure to protect California workers. And so it was made permanent in 1902, and then repealed in 1943, and then Asians were finally allowed to immigrate in this country in 1965. This was thanks to the civil rights movement that finally pointed out that it was discriminatory to restrict immigration for white persons of good moral character. And so a few weeks ago in the New Yorker, there was an article that a police constable kept a log of all the Chinese, the dates of birth, the measurements of their fingers, to keep track of them. I think, why is it important? In 1967, my in-laws immigrated to this country, and 2 years before they wouldn't be able to do that. So there is human consequences to these laws that exclude. And had this law not been repealed, had the immigration not been allowed, probably my life would look different. So because of the change in law, now 1 generation later, I have Asian, Black, white baby. So it kind of spins this racism on his head, because this person is both white, Black, and Caucasian. So what are we trying to achieve today? We're trying to talk about a common definition of racism. We're going to explore some constructions of racism in the second hour and then we're going to at least talk about one Montana case through the lens of systemic oppression. And then at the top of the hour, we're going to talk briefly about some practical tips starting tomorrow of things you can implement. Okay, so in Montana, I don't like to talk too much about statistics, but Black people, Latinos, Native Americans are overrepresented the proportion of Black and Native Americans are jarring, given that the Native Americans are only 6% of the population and African Americans not even 1% of the population. Where are they getting all these people to throw in jail? Is unequal incarceration and unequal arrest. 6% of the population is Native American, but 25% of the jail is full of Native Americans, 22% in prison are Native American. Mass incarceration nationally is an $80 billion industry per year. 1 in 4 men who are Black will be incarcerated during their lifetime. Of the 2.3 million individuals incarcerated in the United States, 40% are Black. The 13th Amendment outlawed slavery except as punishment for crimes. So the institution of slavery, instead of stopping what they are doing, they morphed and transformed themselves into the incarceral system. A lot of those places that had cotton plantations substituted their plantations for jails. So this is what we're talking about. The system, instead of changing when there's a clear law to recognize the humanity of Black people, these institutions change to defeat and to dehumanize and to exploit. Now we'll talk about myself a little bit. It's a hypothetical situation. In 2010, before law school, I lived in Helena. One Friday night, I was walking into one of those watering holes to have a drink. A few minutes later, 6 officers walked into the bar and they spied a Black man. So they walked straight to me, "Come with us." A white man just got beat up by a Black man. Naturally, I was the culprit. There was a 6'5" officer shining his flashlight in my face, hand next to his gun, ready for me to resist. So if I'd been mouthing off, taking issue with the stop, things would have taken a turn for the worse. In another incident, after law school in 2018, I was stopped outside East Missoula, a traffic stop, and the officer went to the passenger side and had their service weapon, their hand next to their service weapon at all times. So now, my friend Hamidou now, who's a Uber driver in Missoula, is taken to recording every interactions with the officers, and he'll use his cell phone to record every interaction with the officers, because there's a real danger that things could go south. And then, as we know, when the officer said you did something, who gets believed? Definitely not the person of color. In one interaction my brother had, he was traveling through Texas, and at the airport, several law officers showed up and roughed him up, thought he was a suspect, and then he had bruises on his face, missed his flight. When they realized they had the wrong guy, they didn't even give him an apology. My brother can count himself lucky that he got to go home to his wife and kids. Others were not so lucky. There was Amadou Diallo. He was 23-year-old Guinean immigrant in New York, shot and killed in the stoop of his apartment by 4 NYPD officers. Through contagious shooting, the officers fired 41 bullets, 19 of them striking Amadou. Amadou was unarmed. Later, the officers claimed It was a case of mistaken identity. He looked like a rape suspect from a year earlier. Then there was Michael Brown, who was jaywalking with his friend. The officer demanded they get off onto the sidewalk. The officer stopped the SUV in front of them to confront them. Officer and Brown exchanged words. Officer fired 2 shots twice. Brown and his friend took off running. When the officer came out of the vehicle, Brown turned to look at the officer, and the officer fired 12 shots. 6 of them killed Brown. Sandra Bland was on her way to take a new job. She failed to use her turn signal to change lanes. Officer had probable cause to stop Sandra. The trooper ordered Sandra out of her vehicle. When Sandra asked why she was being apprehended, the trooper pointed his finger in her face, drew the taser and yelled out, "Get out of the car now. I will light you up. Get out now." Sandra was not a suspect in an armed robbery. The car she was driving wasn't stolen. There were no warrants for arrest. She was arrested for assaulting the officer, allegedly. And she couldn't pay the $5,000 bond, and later she was found dead in a cell. Then there was Philando Castile, shot and killed because the officers thought he looked like a suspect on account of his wide-set nose, like mine. Elijah McClain, he had not committed any crime. Officers had no reason to believe that he did, yet they pinned him down, handcuffed him to the ground with their full weight for 15 minutes. And despite him saying he couldn't breathe and he vomited. So when the paramedics arrived, they injected him with ketamine and he died. He was a sweet and generous man who used his lunch breaks to play violin for animals in the animal shelter. Then we heard the cries of George Floyd, killed for passing a counterfeit bill. He cried, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. Mama, I love you. Tell the kids I love them. I'm dead." So back to my hypothetical. I'm your client. I can't afford bail. I'm picked out from a lineup despite my insistence that I wasn't there. The victim said it was definitely him. Some of you are in the jury panel, some of you are representing me. Assure me that I wouldn't get 4 cold walls without parole, even though I'm innocent. Assure me, what was that you said about you put your blinders on and you don't see color? What was that you said? What was that you said about playing the race card? Incidentally, this hypothetical is not that different from Lassiter that Haley Jackson brought all the way to the Supreme Court. Someone in Billings called police saying a black man was really spooky looking. He was going up and down the block like they were casing out vehicles and houses. That Nicola was referring to Lassiter, whose car was stuck in a snowbank. So Lassiter's friend showed up to help remove the vehicle from the snowbank, and the caller still on the phone with dispatch says, both men look to him like wannabe gangbangers. So you are my lawyer. What will you do to orient the jury about race? Do you do anything? What type of voir dire questions do you have prepared and ready? Or do you prepare? Do you know if I'm closely supervised by the probation officer? Have you prepared any jury instructions? When was the last time you really read Batson and understood it? It takes courage, but I'm afraid I'm being misunderstood. I'm afraid I might be doing more harm than good. I'm afraid of losing my job. If this is my last hurrah, then here we are, we'll go for it. I'm afraid of being viewed as un-American and malcontent. I'm afraid some of you are assuming I'm doing this to get a promotion. I'm afraid this agency might never be inclusive. I'm afraid, above all, that we're harming our clients by being the gatekeepers, by accepting racial injustice and even offering justification for it. Stop telling your clients you know they're prosecutors and you think they are good guys. I'll leave this there for you. What's the temperature? How are you feeling? And then I'll let okay, so then a few minutes have passed, then we move on. Okay, so ground rules: listen to yourself, listen to what you're saying, listen to your neighbor, listen to me as your facilitator. Try to translate what you mean. Give an accurate location, tell the truth about where you are at. Demonstrate a respect for your own experience and a respect for the experience of other people. Listen to meaning and not for words. Suspend judgment and also make this an intentional safe space. Okay, so why don't you talk about race in your cases? While you're answering, we can give you some time to answer.
This is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom.
Fellow citizens, I shall not presume to dwell at length on the associations that cluster about this day. The simple story of it is that 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers were wise men, and if they did not go mad, they became restive under this treatment.
With brave men, there's always a remedy for oppression.
They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary.
Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence?
Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us?
I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary.
Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common.
The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me.
The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me.
This 4th of July is yours, not mine.
You may rejoice, I must mourn.
Fellow citizens, Above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions.
At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed.
Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke.
For it is not light that is needed, but fire.
It is not the gentle shower, but thunder.
We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake.
The feeling of the nation must be quickened.
The conscience of the nation must be roused.
The propriety of the nation must be startled.
The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed.
And its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim.
To him, your celebration is a sham.
Your boasted liberty an unholy license.
Your national greatness, swelling vanity.
Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless.
Your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence.
Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery.
Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings,
With all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him
Mere bombast.
Fraud.
deception,
Impiety.
and hypocrisy. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country.
Okay, so here's your survey results. And then definition of racism. What's your definition of racism? What do you mean when you talk about racism? Okay, so time, and we go to, okay, so let's talk about race. Well, as an agency, when we had a survey, this is what you said in a survey when we were talking about equity and inclusion. I'll let you read through some of these. I've had some problematic conversations about people of color. For instance, some coworkers believe PLM are whiny and racist themselves, or rather than structural racism as a cause of protest is simply laziness. no one here is overtly exclusionary. I think the issue is lack of education. I think anyone with identities that are marginalized would find this a good place to work, but would also hear problematic statements. What do they mean by somebody who's marginalized? And what measure are they using to determine that this place is a good place to work? I don't think our agency is racist or supports racism, except, of course, for some of our clients who are entirely racist and are entitled, and we are enlisted to defend them. What do we mean our clients are racist? What do we mean we are not racist? I wonder what it's like to be the only in this agency, the only Black man, the only Native American woman, the only whatever else. Do we stop short of just wondering? Have we bothered to empathize or inquire or read about it? OPD employees recently used state emails to promote ideas such as white guilt, privilege, and white silence is violence. This is blatantly racist and unacceptable, yet nothing was done about it. In fact, the director participated in it. Are the people talking about BLM racists who are trying to divide us? Inclusion policies are, by definition, discriminatory against individuals who have all the necessary qualifications for a job, but do not have specific racial or sexual characteristics to meet quotas. Inclusion policies are synonymous with quotas, are they? Inclusion policies say that require a manager to study implicit bias would be one that's not discriminatory. But also, is there an assumption there that that jobs are just filled with Black and brown bodies that are people who are not qualified to occupy those seats? Is that the assumption of equating inclusion policies with meeting quotas? Anyway, so we're talking about race. Our agency has work to do still from some of those comments, and there were more. I couldn't put all of them here. The good thing is, in my view, there's something happening. There's some change that could be happening. Our Supreme Court, as we've talked about, seems to be in denial that there's any racial dimension to things. They seem to be denial that racial oppression is happening. They seem to hold the view that we live in a post-racial society and justice in Montana is colorblind. Racism is something that happens in the state of Washington or in the South somewhere. So I ask you, the public defenders, is systemic oppression something that of Black and brown people, something that only happens in the state of Washington? Is it something that only happens in the South? So we have a great opportunity because there are 7 white persons who are on the apex court in Montana, but they are people. They can't be influenced. So in these cases, Montana cases, when we make the arguments touching on race, they seem to be largely ignored. Part of the reason is that you public defenders don't object in the lower courts. So when it gets to the Supreme Court, now we're trying to raise plain error review and it looks like we are really playing the race card. But the other thing is, when the only Black person in the agency is the person talking about race, sure, they'll disregard it. They'll say, well, he's raising the race card. But you see the changes that have been happening. So when our entire agency, through human solidarity, lend their voice, putting systemic oppression in context, singing the same song in unison, where you saw when Catherine Hutchinson lent her voice through brilliance, militancy, facts, and persuasiveness, putting race in context in the case of Peoples that we'll talk about, unpack after lunch. Things started to happen. We didn't win, but we drew a dissent. Debbie won a case tackling race head on. Her efforts paid off. She's brought a bunch of cases touching on race. A lot of them were pushed under the rug, and race was disregarded. But in FAM, she succeeded. Haley, we talked about Lassiter. We can unpack that at a later time. The point is, we have to give our court a true picture of what systemic oppression is. But if some of you are silent, some of you are not on board, some of you don't even know what we're talking about, some of you are afraid, some of you think that we are offending the court by talking about race, then nothing will change. So we need, like I said, cross-racial solidarity. Why do we need that? Change is possible. Incidentally, in Batson v. Kentucky, Justice Thurgood Marshall, the only Black jurist, expressed concern that the preemptory challenges will continue to inject racial discrimination in Jewish elections. He warned that prosecutors could simply and easily assert facially neutral reasons to strike jurors, which is what's been happening. If you look at the Warren case that I took to the Supreme Court, exactly what happened. But Supreme Court of Washington in the St. Carl case acknowledged that that Batson is toothless and inadequate, and it does not reduce the unfair exclusion of people of color. Though the Washington Supreme Court did not overturn that case based on Batson, they started acknowledging. Acknowledgement is part of it. We want to influence our court to acknowledge systemic oppression and then do something about it. So in Washington, they realized that Batson was toothless and inadequate. And so they created this General Rule 37. So in the 1980s, a professor did a study in Washington and showed that Washington published his findings that Washington had the highest disproportionate imprisonment of Black residents in the United States. So after decades and decades of debating both inside and outside the courtroom about the pervasive role of racism and bias, the Washington Supreme Court promulgated General Rule 37. And so first in its kind in the nation. And the aim is to eliminate both implicit and intentional racial bias in jury selection. They are making change. In Washington, before a jury is impaneled and they're made to watch orientation videos. In the videos, are judges, Washington judges, talking about implicit bias. in the video on implicit bias, which is a jury instruction, judges are the ones leading the charge. The bar, if you look at Montana Bar News 20 in, I guess this allowed to remove this strange screen. Montana Bar News talking about rural incubator, et cetera, gone. Washington Bar News, the same month, they're talking about confronting racism on the wrong side of the bridge. It's in their conversations, the bar is talking about it, the judges are talking about it, they're acknowledging and they're doing something about it. So is racism something that's only happening in Washington? Is it happening in Montana? So, and then on June 4th, the Washington Supreme Court wrote a letter to the members of the judiciary and the legal community. And I'll read that letter. We are compelled by recent events to join other state Supreme Courts around the nation in addressing our legal community. The devaluation and degradation of Black lives is not a recent event. It is a persistent and systemic injustice that predates this nation's founding. And they go on and say the systemic oppression of Black Americans is not merely incorrect and harmful, it is shameful and deadly. And then finally, as individuals, we must recognize that systemic racial injustice against Black Americans is not an omnipresent specter that will inevitably persist. It is a collective product of each of our individual actions, every action, every day. It's only by carefully reflecting on our actions, taking an individual responsibility for them, and constantly striving for better that we can address this shameful legacy we inherit. We call on every member of our legal community to reflect on this moment and ask ourselves how we may work together to eradicate racism. So we go by the title justice, and we reaffirm our deep level of commitment to achieving justice by ending racism. This is our moral imperative. All the justices of the Washington Supreme Court signed this letter. They are acknowledging and they are making steps to change it. How about us? So why are we talking about this? So we talked about, now we're going to get to the definition. Yeah, we said change is possible. So getting to the definitions. We saw your definitions of racism. So now Webster says, systemic oppression of a racial group to the social, economic, and political advantage of another. Another definition B, political or social systems founded on racism and designed to execute its principles. In this definition is about prejudice and power. Prejudice, prejudgment in favor of, against a person or a group or an idea. So power is ability to do something. Like in Plessy, the ability to decide who is white and who's Black. The ability to decide what's legal, what's not legal. The ability to control the narrative, frame the lens, frame the lens through which every event is seen. So like the Washington Supreme Court acknowledges there is the individual contribution, individual action that contributes towards oppression. There's oppression at the interpersonal level, but then these definitions touch upon institutional, systemic, structural. So in the next hour, we're going to practice looking at things through the lens of systemic oppression. A lens is just a metaphor, a way of communicating ideas, an event, or an experience through which you can look at data, a particular perspective. So what lens do you have? And we're going to practice using the systemic oppression lens. Now, consider this definition. Racism is a system of white affirmative action subsidized by the oppression of people of color and poor white people to undermine and disrupt natural human solidarity. And then now consider Toni Morrison's definition.
There is no such thing as race. None.
Really?
There's just a human race. Scientifically, anthropologically, racism is a construct, a social construct, and it has benefits. It has money can be made off of it. And people who don't like themselves can feel better because of it. It can describe certain kinds of behavior that are wrong or misleading. So it has a social function, racism. But race can only be defined as a human being.
If the racist white person, I don't mean the person who is examining his consciousness and so on, doesn't understand that he or she is also a race, it's also constructed, it's also made, and it also has some kind of serviceability. But when you take it away, I take your race away. And there you are, all strung out, and all you got is your little self. And what is that? What are you without racism? Are you any good? Are you still strong? You still smart? You still like yourself? If you can only be tall because somebody's on their knees, then you have a serious problem. And my feeling is white people have a very, very serious problem. And they should start thinking about what they can do about it. Take me out of it.
You don't think you will ever change and write books that incorporate white lives into them substantially?
I have done.
In a substantial way?
You can't understand how powerfully racist that question is, can you? Because you could never ask a white author, when are you going to write about black people? Whether he did or not, or she did or not. Even the inquiry comes from a position of being in the center.
And being used to being in the center.
And being used to being in the center.
Okay, so 2 results. Let's see. Okay, so okay, we got some responses. Okay, so, and then, okay, so then we'll end with this. What are some practical things you want to, so I need to trim some 5, 6, 7 minutes so we can get to this about 10, 50, no, 50 minutes before, 10 minutes before the end. Okay, so after people talk about that, yeah, so people will say their thoughts, and then after that, I'll go to that. And then that's the end of the first hour.
How do you feel?
I feel good. It was a little bit off-putting when my family was walking about. But yeah, so it feels good. I feel like there's some things I need to still trim to yeah, it's been hard to package it down to an hour, but yeah, but I'll get there. It's close.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very close.
But what do you think? Is there some things that were not as interesting, or like got you disengaged, or?
I didn't think so. Like I said, I apologize for having to walk out. That was the convention center. So I thought I should probably make sure like we had hotel rooms and stuff.
No, that's fine.
But yeah, I didn't feel like there was anything that I was like, no, you don't need that. I mean, Lydia, what did you think?
I agree. I don't think there's, I mean, this is like the third time that I've been here. I've heard it myself, but if it's the first time, like I think it's totally engaging. I think it's all important stuff to keep in there. I don't think you need to take anything out.
Yeah, I think censoring the editing myself and trying to not ramble on and try to be directed is a little difficult, but I think the third time around we're getting there.
Yeah. No, I'm really excited about it. I'm glad that I'm getting to listen to it now, since I'll probably have to miss it in real time. But no, I think it's great. I think it's
hopefully it will be recorded, and then I can now I want to see how it is, and there's some parts maybe I'll want to hone a little bit. Ideally, if we have even like 5 minutes left for questioning there, that would be nice, but it looks like it's not happening. It's tough.
Well, and we will record it and make it available for people to watch if they can't see it in person. If you're okay with that.
That's fine.
I'll send you this, I'm gonna